We're recording.
Right. Okay, good to see you all. I'm just going to briefly introduce our three speakers and then I'll hand it over to them. First of all, Susan, and I guess you're in Padua, Susan? Yeah? Oh.
Yes, I'm in Padua.
Great. Well, you trained in the ICP, in the Institute of Constructivist Psychotherapy in Padua, and then you did a PhD in social services at the university there.
Yeah.
You're an organizational psychologist using PCP in facilitating group processes. You specialize in organizational development, team coaching, and training. And some of your areas of interest are leadership, design thinking, and effective communication. So very good to have you here.
Thank you.
And next, I will introduce Fiona. Fiona is founding director of FID, a London-based consultancy set up in 2006. Using a combined background in architecture and PCP, Fiona works at the place where organizations and buildings meet, seeking ways in which the design and use of space can support organizational change. You had 20 years of experience, including workplace consultancy, architectural teaching, and architectural practice. Fascinating. Welcome, Fiona. And you are in
everybody.
Dublin with your colleague Shenaz.
Yes.
Aren't you both?
And we met virtually.
As Paul just mentioned, he's never seen two people on a Zoom thing at the same time before. So Shenaz, you're co-founder and director of the Learning Partnership, a chartered occupational psychologist, constructivist psychotherapist, and leadership coach. Your work in organization has been solidly underpinned and inspired by PCP over a 30-year period. In the last 10 years, you've been working with senior executive leaders and their teams who are committed to intentionally shaping cultures of agility, resilience, and well-being in their organizations while facing the challenges of change. So how good to have the three of you to present to us. So let me hand over to you. Are you going to explain the structure? Shall I just say a bit, or you do it, you three?
Okay, well, hello everybody. It's just fantastic being here. So what we're going to do is each one of us will spend about 20 minutes speaking about our ways of working with PCP in organizations. And we'll do it we're trying to do it in a linear fashion where there will be 20, so I'll be kicking off for 20 minutes, then allowing 10 minutes at the end of my piece for reflections and questions and thoughts. All are welcome. Second, then Susan will do her piece, again, 20 minutes. And any thoughts or questions you can put into the chat, and we'll be collecting them as we go along. And there'll be 10 minutes for Susan then to take any thoughts and questions. Then it will be Fiona's turn for 30 minutes in total. That will leave us with half an hour in the end where we can have hopefully a great conversation about PCP. Living and working with PCP in organizations is what we have titled this introduction or this talk. So that's how we propose to fill the next 2 hours. Is that okay?
That's great.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we've called this little series, if you like, Living and Working in Organizations, because it speaks to our lived experience as opposed to how we use PCP. I think that's really, there's a difference there. And before I start, I'd just like to invite you to take maybe 3 minutes, a couple of minutes to center ourselves. So kind of inviting you here maybe to sit back on your chair, and if that's okay with you, to maybe put the eyes down a little bit, We're going to try and embody this, or even close your eyes and arrive here from wherever we've been today, wherever you've been today. So really bringing ourselves into this moment, and maybe feeling the feet on the floor, maybe the breath in the body, maybe allowing the body to perhaps breathe a little, and allowing ourselves to gather this afternoon as we're going to work together and talk to each other. So maybe paying attention to the posture, a dignified posture, and feeling the sitting bones heavy on the chair. Maybe allowing the back to press against the back of the chair and sink down a little. And allowing the shoulders to drop. And coming together into this shared space and taking a few breaths here. And taking a pause. So great. So when you're ready to just perhaps gently open the eyes and maybe coming back to the screen and sharing this moment together. Thank you. Okay, so we're just going to start sharing the slide set, and
Scary.
You need to share the screen.
Yeah, we're getting host has disabled participant screen sharing. Can you enable the screen sharing?
That has to be Mike, I think, to do that. Mike, are you there? Can I do it as co-host?
What's that?
Mike, can you let Shenaz share screen?
Oh, we've got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
so great. So we're starting off, each one of us, but I'll speak in sort of my own experience now, where we've come from with them using PCP in organizations. And I actually have had the really unusual experience of starting to work in October 1988, and I was in the centre in London by the end of October 1988, working with PCP. And I was working in an organisation, and my job really was from a wonderful man called George O'Connor, who had a vision. He had done the diploma. He was an engineer himself, George O'Connor, not George Kelly, George O'Connor. And he could really see how PCP could provide a very important framework of understanding for organizations. So for 3 years while I did the diploma, I also worked in organizations in HR. And my job was to try and assimilate some of Kelly's, all of Kelly's 2 volumes. I had to translate them into everyday language, which did take 2 years. Sadly, I've lost all my notes, but that was the attempt. And I was lucky to be in the centre with them, Faye and the wonderful Peggy, Gigi, all that was wonderful people, and bringing PCP back. I then wanted to do the psychotherapy diploma in PCP, which meant then I had to work in a hospital for about 2 years, in taking on clients post my diploma. And I realized there that so many people were suffering from stress. And a lot of it seemed to be in the workplace or from the workplace in the clinic that was run in St. Bart's. So I thought I was going to go out to do clinical psychology after that, but indeed I thought, no, I want to go back to the source. I want to work in organizations. I want to understand why organizations are such harsh places. Why do people get burnt out? What's going on in there? Yeah, so I had a kind of a passion for it. And I was very lucky that in my last 3 months of working in with the diploma in PCP, I met Sean Brophy. And Sean became a wonderful mentor of mine for about 25 years. He was such an inspiration in terms of the values that he held for people. So that is really where I have come from, and I have, if you like, worked in organizations all this time on different projects. So I'm going to get a little bit organizational here, because I think it's important to understand the big picture that I would like to share with you. So in a nutshell, this is what usually happens, that organizations have a big plan, which is called, of course, a strategy, which is, you know, and a lot of words around strategic perspectives and what a strategy is and all this. But really, a strategy is a really good plan, hopefully. And it has an impact on processes, because as the organization grows, the processes have to grow with them. And what people don't realize is so do the people. So I actually like to turn this around, and I like to put people where strategy is, and really say, well, how are we actually going to create an environment as an organization grows, or is merging, or is acquired, or even is going from A to B? How are we going to create an environment where people can thrive and perform? So there's a dialectical conversation here. It's not perform but burn out, it's the and. And as you can see, the word culture there began to come up more and more. I began to understand it more and more over the years. So a culture, defining culture is very difficult. I've probably spent a long time trying to define what a culture is, because no organization works in a vacuum. An organization is a little bit like a massive family dynamic. And any of you who worked in one, in a HSE or the NHS or any organization, will very quickly know that you're swimming in something called culture. And culture can be defined as lots of different ways, but the best way I have found to have sociality with anybody I'm working with is to define culture as a, if you like, a well-grooved pattern of behaviors that has been consciously or unconsciously shaped by the people, often the leaders, or by the events, or by the processes. And humans are trying to fight or live with this culture. And that's not easy. So how do you try and change that? Because one thing we know for sure is that there is always going to be change, whether a process change, a strategy change, or a leadership change. And then how do you, from the beginning, begin to think about how to shape a culture that includes people's needs and how to develop people to become agile? So a lot of what I do is about presenting this to anybody I begin to work with and bring them to understand then that culture is really the big picture. And then we can build to how we begin to put in the right supportive frameworks for people. The best way that I have found, whether after 10 years or so, I found that the best way to really begin to shape culture intentionally is through leadership, making meaning through leadership. And again, it's hard to convey how important PCP has been for me in that space, because my driver was always to understand the organization I was working with. And in a way, having a diagnostic framework for myself first. So sociality, or building sociality, building commonality, understanding that I would need to really be good at fragmentation after a while. What was my superordinate working in organizations? Could I fragment under that? Was it useful what I was doing? And so on and so forth. But the leadership piece is, in about 2004, I realized this is what I can really use as my bridge into meaningful conversations. So one of the best definitions I've found on leadership is from a wonderful woman, a mindfulness expert who works in organizations. And her definition of leadership is the capacity to connect to self and others, and the ability to skillfully initiate and meet change. So that connection to self is really, really important if there is any chance of changing a relational dynamic in a PCP way in organizations. So the invitation for leaders to connect to themselves. And in 2004, I'd been working about 8-9 years then. I had kept, very much like Kelly, I had kept all of my conversations for about 8 years. And I kept all these challenges that people had, sort of, using them as elements. And then I would have all my constructs beside me. And I began to think, oh, this leadership challenge is a leadership challenge of confidence. And this one is a leadership challenge of complexity. What guided me was 11 corollaries. Could I organize something that would help people to understand themselves under the leadership banner? And so leadership then for myself and Trevor, myself and my working partner at the time, we then published a book which was the 18 Challenges of Leadership, and in 2004. And of course, I put everything that I learned there down to Kelly, which I have in the foreword, George Kelly. But for me, then leadership was the ability to lift up your head and through you, the heads of others. And I got sort of 18 themes, 18 pillars, if you like. And I was able to start conversations with nearly everybody I work with under those pillars and projects under those pillars. So that's really where I've kind of come from. So living and working with PCP in organizations, I would say that, what is it about? It's a psychology for living. It is a heartful philosophy. There is so much about Kelly's philosophy that can be imparted into organizations. Not the least that it's a skillful psychology of change. What an offering. A very positive language around transitions and stressing the importance of being human. What is it to be human in an organization? What is it to keep growing? The cost of that. Can we build more opportunity around that? So where we currently are is a post-pandemic economy. It is frightening what is happening to a lot of people. That the level of stress is huge. The range of convenience that people have has changed. It is an opportunity to really have people-centric evolution and to bring the power of conversation to the table, as well as really putting it out there, shaping collaborative cultures. This is an urgent ask, I feel. So where I've spent the last kind of while really is really inviting, perhaps it's my own growing confidence, but when I'm working with a company, with the leaders, what I would say is this is an invitation to befriend yourself and your people, starting with you. The kind of questions I ask is looking at sensitivity. How sensitive do you think you are as a person? Questions I would not have been asking 10 years ago, but I ask them now. How reactive or responsive are you? How quickly do you think you come back to yourself? And then the offering is talking about PCP and naming it and what it's about. And of course, the myriad of diagnostic tools, theory, and applications. I mean, you have to know when you're stuck in the CPC cycle. You have to know when you're stuck in a decision-making cycle in terms of helping people. And sharing that with them, I find, and using the language that they understand, it works. It just works. So in a way, I've added this in lately, like the pause that I just did at the beginning of the session, I try and do 3 or 4 of those in each of the sessions that I do, with groups, with teams. And no matter how senior they are, they seem to get a lot from just stopping, taking a breath. I suppose it's about construing yourself and getting that connection and bringing that connection, which is here, back onto the leadership sort of space. And from there, we talk about Kelly and choice. And because these are mostly CEOs now that I work with in top teams, they can make these choices to really shape cultures for their people to thrive. Where do we go from here? Yeah, there's something called ZOOD, which I really love. The ZOOD is the zone of uncomfortable debate, ZOUD. And it's sort of about how can we enter the ZOOD? How can we have conversations that are difficult around the ZOOD? And at the moment, most of my work is around being a strategic advisor, and somebody will bring it to execution through using the power of conversations around a massive sustainability climate change piece that involves over 3,000 farmers. These are frightening conversations to have, looking for a new strategy. But unless we can move from a conversation about strategy that does not involve people and the people who are going to really suffer, whether we're looking at climate change factors, which we have to, then how do we honor the people and the culture factor? And it's back to changing and back to change in a Kellyan way, understanding the implications of change and working with that. And in fact, working with everyone to help them understand what change means for them. So I know that Harry, yourself and David just brought out a book on relational, I was only talking about this to Fiona. I hadn't quite put it together. I put it together. Relational constructivism is where it's at. So I'm really looking forward to reading your book about that, because we have a lot to add in that space. One of the things I use all the time is good old Miller's community of selves, pre-post pandemic, working with teams, putting community of selves together in one big community of self, having worked individually with a group of people, a bit like a family, and to see that in each self, we have the possibility of change, underpinned by Kellyan philosophy and principles, and everybody has the key, and teams love working like this. I'm just aware of the time. So this idea that any person might be more usefully understood, which you all know, as a community of self rather than a single unified self structure. Miller Mayor was here in Ireland and spent 24 days with us some time ago, obviously, but it just really remembered how important this is. And really clients find this hugely, hugely relevant. I love this last piece that Miller wrote in his Between Psychology and Psychotherapy, conjuring up subtle and fragile structures, enabling the invisible patterning of a person. Isn't that beautiful? So it's making the invisible visible. So in conclusion, PCP offers organizations a wonderful framework of human understanding. It is a strategic framework for change. I have used it endlessly over the last 30 years. It is so applicable. The poetic license to reconstruct ourselves and the relationship with other, not so much the other, it's the relationship with other, the power of PCP and conversations. Where I'm at is PCP enabling agility and relational fluency. That is very powerful. I'm really playing with that at the moment. And the importance of intentionally shaping relational cultures, which means that we have to create shared meaning in organizations. And there is an appetite for that, I feel, especially now. And can we admit to being vulnerable? Bringing up the vulnerability with the clients I work with teams and CEOs is where I have found in the last 2 years the most, even I was working on Zoom through COVID, that has really come up. And what can we do about it? So that's me, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shenaz. You covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah, no, it's a lot.
You snapped it in. So we have a 10-minute conversation now around your presentation.
Yes, then we'll have a bit less at the end, but that's fine. Yes. So yes, any thoughts, reflections are so welcome. Or questions.
Yeah. Are you, you've stopped sharing, haven't you? Yes. So would anyone like to start?
And it's just more a comment. Just I'm totally aligned with everything you had put in every slide. So just wanted to share that right down to your definitions and your way of being and how you do your work and everything else. So yeah, so just does my heart good. So thank you.
Oh no, thank you. It's great to hear it, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Have you seen Paul's book on Teams?
No, not yet, but I'd be really interested to look, Paul. And I feel we're working in a similar way.
Yeah.
Where can we see it?
It's available.
It's Harry's my best. He's like my book. What do you call that thing? Like a agent, an agent. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
But say it's a line from a spirit point of view in terms of the way Lucy, my co-author, and I think. We probably use different words and different phrases, but it's a line that at a spirit type, deeper essence type level. So.
Just wondering if those folk who haven't got their videos on can hear us. If you'd like to show your faces, that'd be great. Hi, Nellarine.
Hello, Nellarine.
Hi,
everyone. Hi, Robert.
You there, David? I like this concept of agility.
Mm.
Could you give a little example of where you observed that, or how you managed to?
Yeah, I think it's organizations mention it a lot, and how I've kind of managed to tap into that is through questions of how sensitive do people think they are, and they might give themselves, thinking it's a bad word, being sensitive. So it's about really being positive about that word, and how easy do they find it to bounce back from certain changes that are happening in the organization. And if the score is low, it's like, well, where would you like to get to? And really talking about that. It's not a number, it's an experience, it's a felt experience. So the agility is the ability to come back to yourself and bounce back. And what would enable you to bounce back? What is it that you need? And sometimes we can go to, the word that nobody likes, the competencies, but understanding what that means in relation to where, I guess, the person needs to go, the leader needs to go. And sometimes I might supply loads and loads of constructs or elements around that, because sometimes people don't have the words to explain why they're not agile. So, yeah, being stuck, around being stuckness is where they feel there's a lack of agility.
Asking that question about sensitivity is very powerful, I think. So I can imagine that when you meet, the senior team in an organization, there's probably some thoughts about others not being as sensitive as they should be, and being quite a big block on discussion. Does it immediately get you into your zone of uncomfortable debate?
We're there in the first 10 minutes very often, but it's helpful to name that we're going to go there and put up a little picture to say, so we can stay in the zone of comfortable debate, or we can go in the zone of uncomfortable debate. And a little bit of psychoeducation really helps to soften that. So again, a la Kelly, we don't go in somewhere where we're going to cause hostility and threat in the first 5 minutes. What we want to do is create propositional thinking, at least. And from that place, it's more successful.
Shenaz.
Yes. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Shenaz. Long time no see.
I know.
I'm sorry I was late. I got caught up
just in terms of the Zoom, which is a wonderful concept, how do you manage the hierarchy, the implicit hierarchy that exists in companies before you come in? How do you get out of those to make the Zoom debate in any way productive and not just reinforcing the existing hierarchy?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a big question, but I think it's about it's the belief of starting somewhere is where if I had to fight the hierarchy, I think I probably would lose my own sense of direction. I'm now in a lucky place in the last 10 years where I am working with the CEOs and their teams and bringing in the hierarchy, making that alive, creating conversational groups where, you know, as soon as sort of, I suppose, maybe 3 months, every piece of work I do is at least a year. So if I get the trust of the senior team, then I will create conversational pods that will bring in people from different spaces. And that is how we attempt to shake up the hierarchy a little bit.
Okay.
But that's how Robbie, and most of them would have been on a program with me for a year and my colleagues.
Yeah.
And then we come a little bit lower. Not lower.
Okay. That yeah.
That makes sense.
Sorry, that makes sense. You're not just jumping in and attempting. Yeah. There's a super. Great.
If I do jump in, I jump in with the most senior person that will ask, and then I stay with that person for 6 months, 6 sessions, and then we bring in other people. It won't work otherwise, not in the way of the Zood.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll probably stop now because I think
You
it'll be
have
good.
if you want, you have a couple of hands,
Oh, yes.
Nellarine and Yulana.
Please do ask Nellarine. Would you like to?
Yes, thanks very much indeed, Shenaz. Long time no see again. I think the last time was probably in Dublin. But
Yeah.
I've been reflecting on your presentation, which was excellent and, you know, very truthful in a sort of generic sense. It speaks of a real sense of understanding the challenges of working with these teams. But I was reflecting on 2 roles that I have really. One of working with organizations to explore really difficult, intractable social challenges. And the other is as the member of a senior leadership team. And I think there's a different tenor, there's a different clock speed, there's a different conversation that is had depending on where you sit. But actually, it's proved to be very useful to be in that senior position and then reflecting on what needs to be done when going into an organization. So increasingly, I think that many of the challenges that you've described in organizations where people in senior leadership teams are sort of not really in touch with their people in any skillful way is what I would say. They don't really have a sense of how to listen, how to understand, how to reflect on what people are experiencing or saying. I think some of that relates to the sedimentation of certain management practices and norms that exist within organizations, which are incredibly resilient to change. So it doesn't really matter what sector you're in. It could be the NHS, cabinet office, police service, universities. This command and control often is seized upon at times of difficulty, at times when the organization in some way needs to change. So there is a need, I think, not only to engage in sociality, commonality, experience, the way in which people learn in organizations, but I think I take a lot of insight from the dimensions of transition. You mentioned Sean Brophy, And Sean Brophy was kind of my go-to person
Mm.
when it came to understanding how to treat organizations with care, because you weren't going to be there forever. And I think what you've demonstrated is the need to handle these organizations with care, but at the same time, there's a point at which you have to be relatively robust in order for wrongdoing to be made visible. So I think that group grids are really important, or some kind of group account which can be analyzed is really important. And that has to be floor to board, even for the senior leadership team, because otherwise they're disconnected from the culture of the organization. The one thing that I think is really important are values. And I think these industrial values have hardened over the past 20 years. And I think COVID has challenged those values very strongly. So it'll be interesting to see where they move. But I think the issue of values, and particularly the ethical values within the culture, are really critical in determining what can be done within senior leadership teams, either as an insider or as a consultant aiming to assist those consultants on the journey.
Yeah. There's so much there, really. There's so much there. And there's probably more that we could say about all of that. I agree with what you're saying. I'm just aware.
I'm just thinking, time is slipping by. I'm wondering if we can ask Susan to, and if there's any questions from that, we can put it in at the end.
Yeah, maybe because we have another question in the chat. Maybe you, Lana, if you could write down yours as well in the chat so we don't miss
Very
it.
good. That's what I'll do.
Thank you. Sorry, no, I can't take the question yet. Thank you.
Okay.
Susan, over to you.
And I just wanted to show that I have your book here.
Oh, Susan.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I need to apologize for my English. I really hope this conversation will go well, and so be just a little patient if I use weird words instead of the more intuitive one. So I'm gonna start with my personal journey in PCP and organization. This presentation was actually prepared for introducing my purpose in working with PCP and organization to Fiona and Shenaz, and to tell them more about my story and why I asked them to join me in this conversation about the topic. So it's a bit personal, especially at the beginning, and but it makes sense to understand why am I here. So we all use this formula. So starting from the past, what's behind, how did I come here, why did I choose this line of work? Then we're gonna talk a little bit about the present, so around, what am I working at the moment, and ahead, what am I looking at in the future? So what are my next steps in this line of work? Starting from behind, why did I choose this line of work? I can say, like probably many of us, that my professional purpose, if I have to start from there, I would say that I'd like to have a positive impact on people's life. So it's quite broad, quite general, but I think maybe some of you might share it. And then how did we get here? So I did a lot of laddering, and I started asking myself, so why did you choose to work in the organizational field? So why is that important for you? And up at the top of this scale, I arrived to this sentence, which is really important for me, which is all we need is love. What is love? So I thought, for me, love is like a connection. It has to do with commonality, with people sharing something, with a little bit, some sort of dependency and the validation of something that is core and important for us. And what else? For me, if love has to do with a relationship, with a connection, I will say that it's like a shared story, something that tells something about my story, your story, and then somehow these things become our story. So a shared narrative. And so you are probably wondering what's love got to do with all the organizational field and this presentation today. So I'm going to try to tell you how I ended up there. So for me, an organization is like a place where we have a shared story, an organization story that is something that is above many little stories. This circle here represents all the stakeholders inside an organization. So we probably have the founder, a team leader, everyone that works there. We probably have an extended system. For example, we can have the client, we can have some partners. So this is the story that keeps together all of this singular stakeholder story. So it's a shared narratives that takes into consideration all the different parties involved. So this is what I am focusing and why I like this line of work, because I think it gives me the opportunity to work on shared stories and things that keep people together. So this is the connection of with the laddering part at the beginning. So what is leadership? If we look at the organization as a place where we have multiple stories that can be looked from above, and we can superordinate and tell a superordinate story, I'm working with this definition of leadership. So leadership is like a role, a function, the role we can play to tell the superordinate story. So thinking about PCP, I will say that leadership, it's the storytelling that guides the anticipations of the organization's experience cycle. I work a lot with the idea of the experience cycle. I'm going to tell more about it later. And I look at the different experience cycle that we have in an organization, the biggest one and the middle ones and the small one of the leaders, the singular person that I'm working with. But I think the function of the leadership in my work, it's useful to think at the function of leadership as something that guides the anticipation cycle of the whole organization. So I use a lot the idea of storytelling because it helps me to put all the different perspectives together. So that was why I'm interested in this field. So I like relationship, I like connection, and I think that organizations are a way to connect. I'm gonna now talk about my present work. So what am I doing at the moment? I started from a work of translation. I started working with people that works in organization but doesn't have a PCP background. So they told me a lot of interesting stories, and during the last few years, I've been trying to translate them into PCP terms. And then I took what Kelly said about the individual, and I tried to see if I could translate the way I look at the individual as a system to a bigger system, which is the organization. So the same rules, I'm applying them to the organizational level. So I'm talking about a system which has a system of personal construct. Same way we have an organization with a personal, with an organizational construct system. I've been working about organizational development, connecting it to the experience cycle. I've been working a lot on communication and how this connects with the dependency and role constructs. I've been working on leadership, like I said, on group dynamics and motivation. These are some of the most common arguments that I came up with talking with people coming from other PCP field as well, not PCP background. So I am particularly focusing on team coaching. So I do individual coaching with leaders, but what I love to do is to work with groups and to help them move forward into their experience cycle. I'm trying to come up with a method that can help me to do that. So, for example, I will start with with a problem framing phase. A tool that helps me a lot, it's open space technology, which is very useful to connect with all the different perspectives of the people of the group. I use a lot this idea of the stakeholder map, so I can map all the different parties involved, all the different parties that are telling their story inside the organization. I use a tool which is actually really fun to use, which is 3D mapping. It's like Lego, you know, the little brick and characters, and I use them to map the organization situation. I use the idea of the narrative team from Massimo Gilberto, which is really useful, connecting it sometimes with the idea of an implicative dilemma, like Feixa's article. So the idea that the organization is trying to do something, is making a choice, and maybe there's a dilemma in that choice that's causing problems. And so basically looking at the problem as an elaborative choice. I use a lot the choice corollary, and I'm always asking the people in the organization, so you're saying that this is a problem, okay, we can work on that, but why is it useful? What is the meaning of this choice? And then we try to go to the second phase, which is the elaboration phase, where we look for an orthogonal construct and trying to resolve the dilemma of the original choice. And like I said, I use a lot the idea of the experience cycle, the creativity cycle. And thanks to Shenaz, I am now experimenting with the idea of a community of values. So I did some role play with some of the leadership, with a leadership team that had just identified their brand identity and their main values. And we worked on the problem they presented to me from the values perspective. So I did this role playing, and all the values were talking with each other, like I used to do it with in my clinic when I was working as a psychotherapist with a singular patient. We did the same with the entire value of the organization. Okay, so like I said, I really love the idea of talking about stories. And I think that another contribute of Kelly's theory that is very, very relevant is the idea of looking at dependency relationship and relationship based on role constructs. Playing a role is something that I think is very important for a leader. And how can they do that is looking at all these stories. So first up, using sociality to understand different stories of all the different stakeholders, and then playing a role with this story in order to tell the whole story and to promote the movement inside the organization. I'm really happy that I saw David Winter. I don't know if he's actually online because I didn't see his face, and I wanted to say hi because we met many years ago now. And yeah, I'm gonna see him later because with this visualization, I can only see a few people. I've been using a lot the idea of a disorder as an experience cycle that sometimes gets stuck. So the idea of disorder as I think the original article with Beverly Walker talked about non-validation, but I'm not sure about the correct definition, but I'm using it as a diagnostic tool to look at the organization and to see at the problem the organization presents me as a way in which the experience cycle somehow got stuck. So yes, that is, yeah, I'm not gonna go into much details. I just wanted to put there some references about the work that I'm doing. And yeah, this is the other thing I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell my story, which means I'm trying to find a way to talk about PCP in a way that it's understandable, and it's a real challenge for me. I'm trying to talk about PCP on social media. I'm trying to talk about PCP in a way that it's easy, but not so too much superficial. So this is my personal challenge at the moment, and I just wanted to show you the little George Kelly at the bottom of the slides, which I'm really proud of. Okay, so what's next? And then okay. Last part is a particular challenge that I'm working at the moment. I actually started working for some kind of big consultancy company, and my clients were as well big companies. Maybe they were based outside of Italy. They were just very big organization, and usually the ones that can afford this kind of service as well, at least in Italy. But what happened in the last year is that I had the chance to meet another target, which is the one that I'm finding really interesting at the moment. And why? Because it actually gave me a chance to connect with my past. So this whole premise thing it's about saying that my future is actually reconnecting with my original teams. The first thing that interested me when I started my PCP training. So what happened at the beginning? It all started with some adolescence issues. That was me maybe before my 30s. I would say 28 or something like that, starting my training at the ICP. And my main theme was that I didn't want to grow up because I didn't like the implication of the opposite construct pole. There was something about tightening a creativity cycle and just shaping, just giving a definite shape to something that I didn't like. So I looked into it in many ways. I did my PhD research about adolescence. I think some of you might also have contributed. I remember I sent out so many interviews to PC people all around the world, and I got so many wonderful replies. That was very useful and helpful for my PhD research. I worked for 3 or 4 years in residential care facilities, where I actually started to put together my two passions, so this adolescence thing and the group dynamics. I did some personal therapy, of course, and what I found out was that I didn't want to lose all the creativity I was experiencing when construing myself as an adolescent or someone who hasn't made a clear choice about who they are with at the moment. So all this blah, 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 and very complicated personal issue is that helped me discover at some point that actually growing up can be quite awesome if you do it your way. And this is the sentence that helped me in the last few years. And in particular, it gave me the chance to connect with some young companies of people that were trying to grow in their own way. And this is the name I'm giving to this kind of organization at the moment. One of my clients suggested, it's a work in progress. I'm not very happy about it, but I'm calling them at the moment Birkenstock Entrepreneurs, which puts together the entrepreneur part. So I would just say it's very basic at the end. It's just the money part and the business part and the people part. And I am lucky to be working with people that are now very passionate about their work. They're very young. They don't know how to do it, but they just want to do it properly and without forgetting how they started, without forgetting that they were friends at the beginning. And we are lucky now because there are some fields in particular. These people are usually working in the digital and communication field or in the food, in the restoration restaurant or things like that. And so they have a lot of space of developing and getting to a stage where they are not a startup anymore and they want to grow. And what I'm trying to do is to help them do it their way. And it's very interesting. I actually finished one of my favorite projects yesterday. I got an email this morning from some of these guys saying things that really sounded like someone who did a PCP training, and I was really happy about it. So yeah, that's it. Sorry if I got confused and emotional, but it is confusing and emotional for me. So.
Hi,
So
can I ask a question?
Far ahead.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a second-year PhD student at City University of Hong Kong. It's my first time to join up the Meetup, so really like your sharing. I got this one question which you mentioned about the construct system of organizations, right? To me, because it doesn't sound that intuitive, because organization doesn't have conscious. You are using the leadership's construct system to represent the organizations, which I'm a little bit lost there because I think it's an awesome idea, but I think there's a gap between the organization and the leadership's perspective of the organization.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
You know that Gestalt idea that the group is more of the sum of the singular parts. So I think the organizational construct system has something to do with that. Of course, it's similar to Shenaz's idea of culture, I guess. So it's something that it's intangible, but it's all the behaviors we do, it's the color we chose for our logo, it's like everywhere. And this is the system that I'm looking at. This is the system that it's going through the experience cycle. And I know you're coming up with a point that is actually something I'm working on. And I actually talked about this with Shenaz last time, which was telling me, where is the group? What is the connection between the organization system and the role of the leadership? At the moment, I would say that the role of the leadership is the one to promote the movement of this system. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you very much on that.
And the way I would like to put it is that constructs are, as Kelly defined them, pairs of two poles of contrasting meaning, and those can be used by individuals, but they're also used by organizations. And when you say that the leader of the organization may be dictating the way that the culture of the organization functions, the moment the leader is saying something, there will be a whole array of differences that, that are either overt. You might get a colleague who says, no, I don't see it that way. I don't think we ought to be doing it that way. We ought to be doing it this way. And there'll also be a lot of covert opposition to that, to that line that the leader might take. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I guess one of the challenge is to find a way to let all these different voices and these different stories emerge. And that depends, of course, by the number of people of the organization, but and it's easier if the organization is smaller, and as bigger as the organization gets, it's really difficult to let all of these different perspectives and different voices emerge. But I think this is our, this is the role that we can play, like help the organization do that.
Seems to me that there's a kind of a tension, a beautiful tension perhaps, between saying that an organization has a construct system, and then also saying that there are multiple voices within the culture of the organization. It would seem to me that therefore, what the organization of the culture it has to include both what is shared or sociality, but also what is not shared in part, what is contestable. What is contestable. Seems that the meanings aren't in one place in a group, but they're distributed between and among the people and in the relationships. It's a much more diffuse something than the construct system of an individual, I would think.
Yeah, but I still think it's an awesome idea to thinking that way. Like the organization have a construct system. I really like it.
I think it's also important to not slip into ontology. We're not. It's always as if we look at it as if we're not saying in a materialist way the construct system exists. It's all incredibly problematic and complex, but we can look at it as if an organization has a construct system of this kind of structural principles. It's important not to get ontological about it.
Thank you, Robert, for saying that, because I forgot to say that. Of course, all of these ideas are ideas I've been working on. I'm finding them useful. It's a useful model for me, and probably maybe it's not a useful model for somebody else, but it's useful for me, and it's working, and it's nice to share it. And thank you for the part about the ontology.
Good. Yeah.
Anyone else got some thoughts?
Susan, it's not a PCP related question. It's just a question about, you use the word love. Do you actually use that in your business proposition and how you talk to organizations, or is it something you?
No, it's something I arrived to when Fiona and the others asked me to tell them about my personal purpose.
Yeah.
But I am definitely using a storytelling that is very warm compared to the one I was using years ago. So even this idea of using social media, like I'm not talking about love at the moment, but I'm not saying I won't be doing that tomorrow. Like I sense that there is a space for changing the narrative as well. So yes. I'm trying to experiment a little bit with it.
Yeah, no, I don't use the term when I'm trying to win business, but I usually within 3 or 4 hours of any session, I normally bring the word in.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about giving feedback with love. I just bring it in, coaching with love. I use it all the time, and CEOs, top companies in the world respond to it.
Yeah.
Because we can't deny it, but you have to get them feeling safe first of all. So I would encourage you to keep going along that path, because you're onto something.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I think love is a good term, but I think kindness is an equally important term. Kindness is about a generosity of spirit, and I'm sort of motivated by the work of Levinas, which is about being able to walk in somebody else's shoes and a deep respect for others. I think kindness is really very important, and is a kind of bridge to love. I think love is quite a big jump for a lot of people in organizations. Kindness, I think, is I think it's better understood, particularly because of COVID. There was so much kindness and generosity that was expressed to people we didn't know and would never know during COVID, in a way. That I think there's a greater understanding of it, I think, in societies more generally. And even though organizations may be, as Paul has suggested, a bit sniffy about the terms, they want to be seen as hard, and it's a very much a kind of traditional male set of values that are seen as important for many leaders to demonstrate, to perform, but it isn't necessarily what they are and how they feel. So I think kindness is a kind of good bridge to love, in my experience, because it's about a generosity and doing things because it's a virtue. It's a virtue, and it's the more it's seen as a virtue of those who lead, the more that I think it'll be easier for love to follow.
Nice.
Probably just a build on that. Probably is that I probably use it controversially in a way to shake people, loosen them up. And there's when I'm trying to explain a concept, I'll sometimes say what I'm really saying here. This is a word you're not going to hear very often, and it just seems to catch people, and it just catches people. And they go, and they get really curious, and they go like, because they realize something has to shift. Something has to shift. But you're right. Kindness is a much more, but probably controversially, I'd probably just try and shake it up a little bit. But I wouldn't put it in a brief trying to win business, because I wouldn't get across the door probably. So.
Yeah, best way is always to use sociality, and I'm thinking about a first meeting with a possible client. I'm all about taking notes of their words, so I have like a vocabulary of the words that they can relate to and that makes sense for them, and then I start speaking like that. And this is something that Kelly and the clinical therapy has helped me a lot with.
Should we move on to Fiona, perhaps?
We're just about to say that. I think it's a good time. Thanks,
Yeah.
Susan. We'll just move on to Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, so last sharing, and let's hope this one works. Yeah, coming up now, I hope. There we go. And let me just, oops. Yeah, I hope you can see that.
Yeah.
I'll just bring it onto full screen mode. Okay, so space. So following on the theme of space behind me, space around me, and space ahead of me is, as Harry said, my background is architecture, and I was first drawn to PCP, which I came across when I was doing architectural teaching, as a designerly way of thinking. I recognized it, and why wouldn't it be? George Kelly did start off his professional life as an engineer, and for me, I think that way of thinking that very much influences his whole theory. As Harry said, I'd say I'm located at the place where organizations and building meet. And my work is about how space can support or sometimes hinder a change. And in terms of looking ahead, well, I think like many of us, I'm being really challenged to reconstruct what we might mean by space and how we occupy it. So starting with behind, how is it that we learn our trades anyway in the first place if we join organizations? And I remember hearing this from somebody I taught with years ago, is by observing how competent practitioners behave in different situations as they're carrying out their job. This is how we learn to behave as a member of that community. So it's a bit of learning by copying, improvisation, etc. And Broadway musicals give us an example of this, the learning and working being social processes. Looking at the work of Uzi, what he found out, not surprisingly, Broadway musicals, when he was looking at how relationships, how they were created, the collaborations involved, they're more likely to fail if they're created by a team of strangers. It takes a while for us to get to know each other and learn how to work together. But I thought was a little bit more surprising. He said it also doesn't work if it's created by a team of regular collaborators. We become too complacent, we move into groupthink, and we no longer innovate. And so his ideal was a success would follow if we had teams created by old friends and newbies, so that we're building upon experience, but there's also the opportunity to explore new ideas. And his example of that was West Side Story and how that came about. So we might talk about being in organizations and learning as participating in communities and networks. And if we look at how we progress through our working lives, in our early years, we're finding our learning years, we're discovering new worlds as we venture out of the home, maybe getting glimpses of bigger worlds. In our early working, we're going deeper. We're beginning to discover who we are, define who we are, but we may also begin to extend who we are through the networks we start to build. So there's something here about Kelly's definition and extension. And as we go later working and go wider, we actually begin to participate in building new communities and creating new networks, as indeed we are doing here. It's nice to see some old friends and lots of newbies. And this is inherently spatial. And the role of space in supporting, helping communities and networks is, if we think about it in terms of bonding and bridging. And what bonding does is help define communities, and what bridging does is extend networks. And spatially, what we're looking at are places with defined boundaries, spaces that we can own, and that allows communities to form and develop distinct identities. Whereas bridging would be places with permeable boundaries, those places that we have access to, that we can come in and out of, and that we can connect in different ways. And it's been happening for years now. Space is being redefined, that the space that we occupy, it's being extended virtually. And if we were to take Harari's view, is that the internet is a free and lawless zone that erodes state sovereignty and ignores national borders, that really our whole traditional way of being in communities and networks is being expanded. I personally am very excited about this. I think it's all very good that we could have an expanded consciousness, but I think we haven't even begun to know how to use it and use it well. So there are dangers attached to it too. But I don't think it's something we should be afraid of. And I'm reminded of Star Trek, into space to boldly go. But COVID has accelerated the pace. And this brings me, I suppose, and all of us to where we are today. What is around us today? And as we start to emerge from lockdown, some of the conversations we found quite interesting is as organizations begin to think about what are the activities that were started during lockdown, and what were the activities that were stopped. And if we look at the activities that were started, what ones don't need to be continued as we come out of lockdown? What ones actually are new that are worth continuing? And equally in those that have stopped, what ones do we not want to restart? And what ones may be worth restarting? So looking at, as an example of that, hopefully we don't need to continue social distancing, as it's called in the UK. I'm with the Australians on this. They call it physical distancing. What we're looking for is social connection while we're physically distanced. Worth continuing, working from home. I think there are lots of benefits to it. I'm not sure about it being all the time work at home, but most organizations and individuals certainly would agree it's worth continuing. In terms of activities that don't need to be restarted, excessive travel. We hear a lot about the long commute, but also attending meetings in person, flying all over the world or what have you. Maybe some of that we don't need to do. I would say certainly worth restarting is working in the office, but that office will be a very different place. And we might summarize it and say, if we assume, take on Kelly's basic, start with a hypothesis, that the future is blended. And we know how to work effectively in office. We've been doing it for many years. We know how to effectively work online. We've learned this in this last extraordinary experiment over 2 years. But how do we begin to integrate both? And in terms of organizations in office space, we are all going to become part-time users, or the majority of us. And what we're learning is that there are people who are already doing this brilliantly. And football would be an example of how to do blended brilliantly. In football, we've got the stadium, which is the huge emotional experience. You're part of the crowd, maybe more than part of the game. The players are very far away. You can get a helicopter view or whatever, but what you really get is that emotional sense, the Mexican wave, whatever it is that's happening during that live event. The pub would be a different kind of a experience where you can come together with strangers and friends to watch it on screen. It's a more intimate experience in that you can get close-ups of the footballers, you get commentary, you can get replays, etc. It's not compensatory for being there as a live event. It is something that is different. And then we get another layer again, which is the sofa. Where you can completely tailor the experience that you want at home or with friends. You can watch the highlights, you can save it up and watch it later, you can watch it again and again. It's another experience completely. And then a hybrid experience, which is the personalized option, where you may be watching a live event and listening to your favorite commentator and getting a particular take on it. So as we move it into this blended way of working, we're not talking about compensating one for the other. I would suggest that what we are trying to do is learn to use all of them well and learn how to operate in these different space types. So looking ahead, from the work that I've been doing with my own clients and what seems to be coming back from industry generally, my current thinking, and I think there are other practitioners working in this area who would agree, is that there are 5 things the blended workplace needs to achieve. And what I'll do is go through one slide on each of these and take you through them. So the first is build connection. Build reconnection. I think, while we've done extraordinary things in keeping things going remotely, we've also in some ways learned about each other more because we've seen each other in home environment, learned about each other's kids, what have you, but most people I think would feel is that we've actually lost something too. We need to come back together. Working is a social process and we are discovering new ways in which to bond and bridge. Our in-person and online participation is redefining our sense of communities and networks. The second one, enable oversight. This one is for me been the most difficult to tease out, still in the process of that. And by that, what we mean is inducting, training, mentoring and managing. And what many organizations have said is they've had no problems interviewing new people online, getting on new recruits. The inducting has been a big problem, and helping somebody to actually become engaged in a community, the culture, learning about the organization. And it comes back, I think, maybe to that very first slide of learning our trade, just being able to casually observe. But we're hearing too, in terms of managing, is that it has been difficult to manage online. It has become more formal and has needed to, but a lot of that informal managing that takes place, just knowing the sense of the overall atmosphere, knowing how people are with other senses, a lot of that has been lost online. So we're beginning to redefine how we're using our resources and people, the kind of conversations we're having. Technology has been absolutely fantastic in terms of keeping us connected through lockdown. Processes are beginning to change. A lot of organizations now looking at flexible working, trying things out, what's policy, what should be mandated, what should be like flexible, etc. Time. what kind of hours are we working? Working anywhere and any time can become everywhere and all the time. But interesting, I was talking to a colleague too who said he finishes up at 6 o'clock. Some of his colleagues are working evenings, especially when in the UK there was homeschooling. And he comes in the next day and he's got a whole day's work to respond to, having finished a day's work the day before. So there's something about, if we are working different times, it can actually mean there's no downtime for anyone, because we're coming back and there's already another load of work to do. So flexibility is an interesting one in terms of what it might do collectively to us. And then location, what gets done where. That's the second one. The third one is supporting individual work. And here what we find ourselves doing is exploring location options. And if we are looking to increase individual productivity, flexibility and choice, if we start in the middle and say you could do any of these activities, either what ones might you choose to do in the office and what ones might you choose to do at home. So there's something around, I think, originally, maybe people thinking we can be flexible. I would suggest to work in a hybrid way means that it requires a huge step up in learning and self-awareness and accountability. It's not just something that's going to happen. But I feel it's an exciting thing, and it's great to have this learning. If we're looking at enhancing collaboration, again, increasing opportunities for interaction. And so they're busy slides, I realize, but hopefully the voiceover helps with that. And again, it's just looking at the list of activities that one might be involved in together and thinking what ones are done better in the office, what ones are done better from home. Some meetings like regular team meeting catch-ups can easily be done online. Others like brainstorming, reviews, etc. You may want to do those in person. But there's something about shared experience. And if we think about what was happening in music a few years ago, and when Spotify came on board, it was, the idea was, here's the death of live music when we've got streaming and what have you. No, the live gigs have become even more important, and the music festivals. And there's something about bringing people together for the emotional experience. So coming to the office for events, whether they're work events, social events and what have you, but also the wraparound events that go with that, the downtime, the in-between time, etc. And a lot of the importance of being in the office actually being about the casual conversations, the ad hoc, oh, how do I do that to my neighbor, etc. Whereas a lot of the conversations we tend to hear is people saying, well, I don't need to come to the office if I don't have any meetings, or I don't need to come to the office, I don't need to do this. Maybe we do need to go to the office occasionally just to reconnect. And the fifth one is nurturing well-being. And in this, we mean both people, I was going to say people and planet, three things: people, organization, and planet. And again, very much around sociality, and listening to some of the comments that came back around the different community of selves, the different conversations, is recognizing that different people have different roles, different responsibilities in organizations. And if we look at it in terms of space, we would tend to think of space that's efficient, it's effective, it's expressive. So for people, it might be that I come into the office, I can do what I want to do, whether that's concentrated individual work or focused collaborative work, or just socialize, spend a lot of the day catching up with coffee and people and such like, because I want to do all my concentrated work at home. So there's something then about effective is how am I as part of this team, part of this organization, that I actually belong here, and expressive is it somehow reflects me. But for the organization, it's got a different set of criteria. It needs to reduce its operating costs, or at least keep them manageable. It needs to think flexibly. It's not just about we talk in terms of buildings, in terms of first users, next users, future users. That all of us are just, passing through an organization, influencing that. What are we doing on our watch, etc. But hopefully it will continue after us as well. And then for the planet, which has become such a big subject finally, is resources that are well utilized, How do we reduce our carbon footprint? And how do we get resilience, long-term values expressed? So coming on to then the blended workplace landscape, it's really starting to change in that if we're looking at more open plan environments with sitting, standing opportunities, places that people can go for to watch a webinar, to make a phone call, to go away and do some concentrated work, to have a hybrid meeting, etc. Then different ways of coming together, whether it's in a kind of more casual way or more formal way, blended, etc. So the workplace landscape really changing. And this is very threatening for many people. And I find Kelly's constructs of transition become really useful here. But it's also very useful because it grounds a lot of the conversations. It's very easy, and we have become very sophisticated, I think, at organization talk. And we can talk values, and we can talk this, and we can talk that, to actually be able to say to somebody, well, what does this look like in terms of space? And people can sometimes be quite shocked when they think, you know, well, I didn't mean that, you know, I don't want to share my desk, I don't want to give up my office, you know, whatever it might be. Yes, we want equality, but no, we need to keep a hierarchy in terms of how space is allocated, how it's used, etc. So it can be a useful way of, first of all, acting as a mirror back, but also taking some of the emotion out of situations and giving people a little bit of space between them and how they might be thinking or viewing things. So just to wrap up, not many more slides now, is there's something I think for me around unlocking a way forward. We're in unprecedented territory in this situation. And two questions I find coming up again and again is, what's the right level of intervention, whether it's dealing with people and conversations and cultural change, technology, processes, time, or space and location. And I find myself thinking about, is this an introduce, an enhance, or transform? Is this something that we're only going to start talking about, but we're not going to make any spatial changes? Or is it something that we might try adding in some new settings, but we're not going to change very much? And there's something too, I think, around this time is very much about offering people stability. There has been so much change. The idea of even more change, it can be very frightening. And you think, well, what can we keep stable? And for me, in some ways, I think while it might sound a contradiction in terms, to actually lay down the rules or the terms may actually give us more freedom. And one way is to think about in terms of the rules of the road. They're very clear, they're very transparent. We know them, we by and large abide by them because they maximize our freedom to travel where and when we want. And there are consequences if we don't. And this may be a time, you know, rather than a time of great experimentation and opening up and such like, it may be, I put it forward, I don't know if this is the answer, but it may be we need some tightening in order to give people the emotional, if you like, resilience to be prepared to experiment and loosen up. And the second question, what's the right level of experimentation, is maybe there are two questions to consider. Is it good enough for now? And is it safe enough to try? And this was the advice given by a Marine who worked in extreme, serious, dangerous situations. And they said they were the two questions they use when they're moving into something and have to act fast. And there's also something I think about this is like, we don't have to invest everything in it. We don't have to decide everything. We just need to be able to go along at a pace that we can comfortably manage. So there's something about involving all key holders. And that's come up in all of our talks and in the conversations afterwards. But this is very difficult it's really, really difficult to have these collective conversations. How do we frame them? How do we find a set of shared parameters that we can talk about when we're all coming at things from such different angles? And some of the PCP concepts I think are really useful here, and taking them from the individual person to the organization or the team or the group. And, you know, nobody knows as much as everybody. We all have a part to play. Co-creating the master key, we can all work together to unlock this. And again, coming back to Kelly, we already know everything we need to know. We need to find ways of being able to bring it into consciousness and into conversations in the culture that the cultural speak, if you like, that the organization can work with. And final slide is also something about holding on to being human. And coming back to Harari again, is that it is a really scary world that we're entering into, exciting as it is too. And what is it that we're going to do to continue to outform algorithms? And people talk about, algorithms can't feel and such like. And I was listening to an academic challenging a group of students on this, and a class of students, and he said, how many of you use dating apps? And how many of you would rely on the dating app over the advice of your parents or the judgment of your friends or the help or what have you? Is make no, we need to get real about this. It's happening. And he uses the example of the farm horse. And the farm horse lost out in terms of leading coaches because it couldn't do the two things that people wanted, which was convenience and speed. And then taxi drivers being replaced by Uber drivers, who are soon going to go the way of horses when we go into driverless cars. So I just end on that, I think, coming back to a lot of the work that I get involved in, it's very concrete. It's okay, what does that mean in terms of space? And what was interesting working with Susan and Shenaz on this is being pulled back into, actually, this is about being human at a very fundamental level. It is about being human. And I would say we're entering into expanded space. It is huge opportunity for us, but we have so much to learn and be mindful about. Okay. Thanks. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Again, you've managed to pack so much into that. Incredibly impressive, all three of you. And some lovely metaphors there you've used. And the visuals as well. Where do you get all those lovely pictures from?
Most of them, I'll tell you, here's a tip, on Splash. You can download free pictures to use without open source, no copyright issues.
Did you say Splash?
On Splash, UNSPLASH. Susan is nodding there. I think you probably found it too, have you, Susan? Yeah.
So shall we open the thing up to general discussion?
Or questions about Fiona's part?
I'd like to make a comment.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry.
I'm sorry. You had questions?
No, sorry. I just, Fiona should have her own discussion before we open it into the wider.
No. Michael, comment is grand. Off, go for it.
What would you like to do?
I said, if you want to make a comment, please do. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to make a comment about all three, though. That's
okay.
Can I make a quick comment, Fiona? Because I thought your presentation was incredibly insightful and empathetic, if you like, with the experiences that people and the organizations they work with and their families have had to experience over the past 2 years or so. I was amazed at how quickly people adapted. That was the thing that surprised me. So I think organizations are concerned going forward, but I think what they need to hold on to is the speed with which people adapted. You know, so if I think of my work as an academic, the students got it, the academics got it. It was more complex for people who had care responsibilities, you know, young children, and even there was a managing of it all, which surprised me. I'm not saying it was without cost, because a lot of people felt very tired, very drawn in lots of directions, but even allowing for that more negative set of experiences, it did surprise me how quickly people adapted to a very different way of doing things.
It's extraordinary, Nervine. And I was talking to a lot of my work is with in further higher education, as well as workplace. But I was talking to one of the universities in Australia, actually, and they said for 10 years, they've been trying to get more of their programs online or begin to look at hybrid ways of working or what have you. They had 5% online in 1 week. They got the other 90% online.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely.
I mean, that's overnight, essentially. And the thing that we found, particularly with our students who, you know, have some kind of, they sit on the neurodiversity space, is for them, it was brilliant. It was much more accessible than face-to-face classroom-based learning. So we're moving to what we call mixed mode education now, which is what I'm delivering. Well, I'm not doing the face-to-face for a reason I won't bore you with, and half the term face-to-face and online, if you wish, and then the other half of the term all online. And really, you know, maybe it's because of, I mean, I think we're quite fortunate in that we're in a space where laptops, mobile phones, you know, are second nature to younger people. That's made it easier in the higher education setting. But I think gradually, you know, they were the early adopters, but everybody to some extent is using some kind of technology that wouldn't have been available 30 years ago. And I think maybe that's been part of it, but it's the break with the office space, with the workspace, that I find the most interesting, the way in which people have adapted to that, not being there as quickly as they have.
It has, but there's also an incredible reluctance now to go back to the office. And it's interesting, you know, you talk to people and they talk about what's not working online and what it is that they really miss. And then you say, well, how many days ideally would you come back to the office? And many are saying 2 days a month, 1 day a week. And you think, really? All of those things you say you want to do, you need to do, or that you haven't been able to do you really think you can do those in 1 day or a week in the office? And you know what they don't want is the commute.
I think that's right. I mean, my nephew is a director at HSBC, and he spent most of his time on a plane going to Hong Kong, Shanghai, New York. He hasn't done that for a year. So he's basically said, I don't need my office in Canary Wharf. I will just work from home and travel when I need to. And now the entire exec have to hot desk. The exec have to hot desk. I think it's not just missing the commute. I think it's more than that. I mean, it's an awful phrase, work-life balance, but the kind of industrial model of work was an imbalanced model for a balanced life. And what people experienced was a sense of what they were not able to do because of the commute. So it's not that they miss the commute only, but it's all the other things they are able to do because they don't have to commute. So I think it's the richness, the enriching of life, which I think is more important than missing the commute.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's actually a good point to open up the conversation to everyone and come back to Michael, to you. Said you had an observation about all three, so Shenaz, come in there.
Mike.
Yes, thank you. I must tell you, what I love about these three talks, especially together, is the extent to which they seem to center on humanity. The idea of Shenaz is talking about relationships and sociality. When Heather talked about love, boy, how bold to say that. And when Fiona talked about what she was talking about as being human, I was really quite taken with that, because at least I believe that, our contemporary notion about organizations, and particularly business, is very bottom line oriented. It's about what Nellarine talked about, the industrial mentality. We're about productivity and not about people. And Shenaz wanted to put people right in the middle of the diagram. I'm wondering about how the three of you, or anyone else, what ideas you have, what experience you've had, and what ideas that you have about how to bring love or kindness, being human and persons as one of the central focus of organizations, particularly business, when that may seem to conflict with the bottom line.
Do you want to give that a go, Shenaz?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to take that one. But I think for that to happen, Michael, it's the intention, and there is a lot of negative bias, even in bringing something like PCP deeply into organizations. So even my experience in the late 1980s and maybe early 90s or mid 90s, that I was working with organizations using PCP, it was like, what are you doing in there? I mean, it's never going to work. And this was sometimes from people who are already in PCP, organizations they're so stuck and they're so demanding, and the hierarchy is so terrible. And really, what I really want to say to people is stop moaning about it, do something about it. Go there. Like in a way, I have a private practice, and I've worked in a hospital environment. People come to you in hospitals, or they come to you in private practice because they want to change. But the people in organizations get stuck because it's an arid land. So unless really, in terms of even from the moment of doing psychology or psychotherapy or any of the humanities, if we don't have this want and this philosophy to really bring this common humanity to the surface and vulnerability to the surface, and speak with conviction that it is our roles as therapists and psychologists and academics to speak about this more, that would be a good start.
Brilliant.
Can I add just a little piece? And in my experience, I think an organization that takes into consideration the whole three levels, like the strategy, the business, the how, the method, the processes, and the people, it's a healthy organization. And I think that every day more and more organizations knows that. So it's actually becoming more clear, I guess, at least from what I observed, that you need the whole package, like humans, people are essential in the whole package. And it's actually good for the other two, for the business part and the process part. It's an integrated approach. And I think it's becoming more and more common to look at things this way. And if I think about how I can promote this kind of view, I think that it's like in therapy. You have a patient and it doesn't want to see something. There is a resistance to change somehow. There is something. What you do, you just try to create the conditions to make the person or the system, in that case, to experience something different and to experience a little bit here, a little bit tomorrow, and a little more, until looking at the organization in an integral way becomes the most collaborative choice. And it is. So this is how it works. Like, it's actually very easy to show how is the most collaborative choice for the system.
Fiona, I really liked your slide about space and the idea that space is changing, or that our concepts of space are disintegrating. We've had an interesting example of that in Coventry, where we've run a foundation course for the last, what is it, Heather, 12 years, something like that, in Coventry face to face. For obvious reasons, we went online, and this year 7 out of 16 are not in the UK. So we've been almost driven into being international. We didn't decide to do that. People came along and said, can we come? And so it's been quite an interesting experience of that idea of national, local boundaries just disappearing.
Yeah, yeah, it's and I heard somebody else, Peter, say, it's lovely to see you again, you know, after so many years. It's say too, you know, actually living much more locally, living in a much smaller world, but in a much extended world. Because, you know, and I've certainly been involved in a few conferences in the last 2 years where just the participants have been global, whereas before they would have been national, you know, or even regional. And the level, you know, the difference in the conversation, the perspectives has been huge. So I think it comes back to this thing is these are not compensatory. They offer us new opportunities for growing. But it's to do so in a knowing well, and you know, not to be taken over by big tech or what have you.
And there's also the idea of risk. The first time I was working with somebody who was actually in Singapore, and she burst into tears. And I thought, what do I do now?
Yeah.
The whole business of therapy online is quite different from face to face.
It's very different. And I think we do need both. And we need to be agile in terms of this will be better done online. This is better done in person. And, you know, and beginning to give an understanding of communities and networks and space and interactions. It's a huge learning curve. But I'm with Nellarine, and when I look at what was, you know, we've all been able to do in the last 2 years, change is sometimes easy when it's forced on us. And maybe, Susan, what you're saying too is sometimes you just need to provide the conditions, and you know, maybe a little bit push somebody into it if that's not the right, maybe that's the wrong word to use, but actually, and you can do that with space. You know, you can just do something which changes behavior, and then people can begin talking about it in a way they may not have been able to do before.
I mean, the thing with organizations is, having gone around this particular conundrum of how to begin to shape some change or offer change, is in Kellyan terms, you know, working at the very, very top of the food chain, whether it's with government or whether it's with academics or anybody who's on a very senior team, being human and really means for them that they can also say that they don't know how to change, and they don't like this change that's coming, and they can't even anticipate the change. You know, there's so much hostility, and that is a danger of so many of the human errors in big organizations, on big boards, etc. But unless there is a presence that offers the space and can convert and translate what is important to you. And for many CEOs, of course, it's the bottom line. Of course it is, because what they do, it's not a charity. So you have to really understand that. I mean, I've not met an entrepreneur who's made millions and hasn't worked incredibly hard to do that. Most of them were mortgaging their houses at one point. So understanding their co-construing and understanding where they're coming from and the performance that they want, and how are they going to do that without their people? But it's being willing to tolerate, even in myself at times, the discomfort of talking about performance, about you know, KPIs, about profit, and all of that. But what is that about? That's about a shared language. That's about me not judging you. And then we get past that to offering what we can offer. So there's something about, and I think, Kelly, you know, it's an inner, outer, internal, external dialogue. It starts with us. It starts with us, the person going in, whether it's with families or organizations, is what can we tolerate? What is our level of agility for this, at times, excuse the French, shit that you're going to get? Because you're going to get it. You know, so what's our tolerance for? What is our own permeability about? Can we tolerate new elements in these conversations. Can we loosen up enough to really listen? Or do we just want to tell them what to do and to put a diagnostic on it?
Just to build, thank you, Shenaz. Wow. To Michael's question about what we need to do, I had the pleasure of speaking about a year ago to one of the top leadership gurus in the world. I was on a call, and it happened to be their 70th birthday that day. And I asked them the question, what would your 30 or 40-year-old tell yourself right now? What would you have done differently the last 20, 30 years? And he said, I wish I'd been more courageous. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take that as my thing now. I'm 48 in a month's time. I'm going to use that for the next 20, 30 years and see where that gets me, what that does. So just being more courageous and not, I don't mean the word shit, but not giving a shit, And I've been doing, and he said, actually, the more he does this as he gets older, he's trying to retire. The more he does it, the more work he gets.
Yeah.
The more people want him to come in and work with their organization. So I thought, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to try that approach. It's authentic and it's real. The second thing I just wanted to say was I work with a lady who used to be marketing director in Disney. I thought she does the best slides in the world. You three folks have done, I don't know, as Harry said, all three, the design is absolutely beautiful. Like put hers, unbelievable. Sorry, I appreciate that. The third thing, the hybrid office thing, I would not underestimate how difficult that is going to be right now. I've been in a few different companies in London in the last month. Companies are struggling, global companies are struggling. What happened was during the pandemic, we were under threat, and we're under threat, we can make change rapidly. We're in this place whereby it's just not clear. And one company actually said, big PLC said, their policy was, wrote down, work anytime, anywhere. Now they're back in the office again. And a lot of people are saying, I don't want to come back in again. And I know people I've been coaching who've actually moved 2 or 3 hours to the coast and not told their company. So this is going to be more difficult. I don't know what the solution is. I actually wrote down, Fiona, you were inspiring me there whenever you were, I put in the chat there. Basically, I don't know why they're all C's, but this is from your slides, but clarifying the challenge, we have to really be honest with the challenge. People do not want to commit what's going on psychologically. Co-creating the future. Leaders and companies do not know the answer right now. They're stuck. They don't know. And they have to co-create it with their teams and their staff. Creative approaches. I think we have to say, well, what is a new way of doing things? Because we don't actually know right now. I was talking to a tech firm the other day, and they said the tech is not the issue. It's how we use the tech. We have all the technology. And then courageous decisions. We have to make decisions that people maybe won't like. And then choice within limits. I think, yes, people need choice, but there's some limits in that. And there are 3 things of possible solutions. Collaboration, events. I love that thing you talked about, events. I think we are going to have time together when we're in the office to get the best collaboration. Connection moments. I think, how do we create moments when we're in together again? And the last was commuting sensibly. There's a big thing there about commuting. There are just some things just from your presentation put under C's just to help me remember them. So.
Yeah, it's huge. It really is huge and exciting, but but it's finding a way through it that it's not daunting and overwhelming. Sorry, Susan.
I loved your reframing of it to use the word exciting. You said that in the presentation because it can be quite daunting. So I'm going to use that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think for me the key aspect would be co-creation. I worked with a company, I think 6 months ago when we had like the second wave of lockdown. So around March, I guess. And they asked me some help on how to reorganize this way of thinking the workplace, the time where, which day should we come to the office? What could we do to keep feeling connected? There was a lot of, like the leaders were really worried. They had no idea about how the people were feeling. There was this anxiety and threat and great fear of losing control over the situation. And we did an open space technology kind of activity online, of course, because we couldn't meet in person. And what was really useful there was starting from the needs of the people.
Yeah.
So I put just the topic there, the smart working, how can we do these smart working things? And I asked them to come up with the questions that, you know how the open space technology works. So I asked them to each one of them to come up with 1 or 2 questions they would like to get an answer to. on the topic, like what do I need to find an answer to on the topic? And then we clustered the answer, we divided it into groups, and they actually came up with all of these ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that it has a really strong base, and it's most likely going to be useful.
While listening to this conversation,
may I just thank all the presenters. It was a really interesting presentation by all three. It was great to hear it. I just have one comment, and it's not a criticism, but I work at a university in a counselling service, and I think a lot of our conversation today is very adult focused. And I think we need to remember that there are different cohorts. Yeah. We have no idea the impact all this has had on young children. Yeah. And we at the university are certainly seeing a huge increase in a demand for counselling from our students. Yeah. So we have to acknowledge that there are different impacts on different age cohorts. And it's been a huge experiment, and time will only tell the impact of it all. But thank you very much. It was great.
I would just want to say one thing on that. My local builder friend would break his heart laughing at this discussion because he can't actually repair my roof from his home. And I think there's the whole thing about categories of work, and that we're getting into very peculiar situations where I'm different because I'm at home working all day and he has to go out. What does that mean?
Yeah, we are in a relatively privileged position. But I do think some organizations have been better at treating this experience as a kind of learning laboratory, where they can test things and get a sense of, so Susan is right. Once there are ideas that can be explored, then people have to be brave enough to test them. But I also think there is a great deal, and I think the point that Robert's raised is right. The anxieties around uncertainty, and there are some organizations, some individuals who are much more able to cope in a lockdown situation when the rules are absolutely clear: wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands, than when things start to become more fluid. So I do think we need to think about, at an organizational level, a leadership level, the capacity of leaders to engage in what Kelly would refer to as the comprehensive construct, being able to project yourself into a different future. And I think a lot of organizations are really struggling with that. They are stuck, and they're not learning, they're not loosening their construing sufficiently to enable them to project themselves into a different future. It may take time to get to that point, but they are struggling.
I wanted to say one more thing just before I thought we'd be quitting quite soon. I wanted to say something about just what we're doing here today. This is our adaptation to the PCP used to be mostly happening in biannual conferences, and this allows us to get the whole world together in a way, and we should need more of this. This is the way that I can connect with this PCP. So Harry, keep doing this and get more of it happening.
Yeah, I'm getting rather old though, Gerald, like some of us, and we need some younger people to take the burden, which is quite heavy. But let me finish just by saying that I've been so impressed by today's session. It somehow reflects the reality that we're all facing in the most incredibly rich way. And I'm glad you made that comment, Robert, about the young, because I think, I've got 3 teenagers in the house at the moment because my son's on 3-week honeymoon. And they're in a completely different space in relation to all these issues. Not one that I completely understand, of course. But anyway, let me say thank you again to everybody. I think this has been an incredibly good session, and I'm so pleased to know that this will be on video in perpetuity, along with many other videos we already have now. And let me just say that we look forward very much to you, Heather, in 2 weeks' time. You will be talking about experiences that made you and using the comic strip approach to looking at an experience, which sounds very intriguing and leads nicely into working with younger people. And I'm sure you'll be able to help us look in more detail at that. So thanks again, everybody. And have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
folks. Brilliant. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Michael, can you save that chat down, don't you? Is that saved, isn't it?
Yes, we need to save the chat. Can we stop the recording?
Thanks so much, Harry, for inviting us.
Thank
we
you
just
very
want to
much.
say thank